If you have anxiety, are you more likely to get a hangover? What about if you're just more sensitive to the effects of alcohol? And is there a way to prevent it if you know it's going to come on? So I recently did a video on like the treatments for hangovers, or basically how there aren't any. And I've talked about people who say that they don't have hangovers in the past. And it's true, there are a group of people who like never experience a hangover. Their body is feeling the effects of the alcohol, their immune system is being activated, but they don't actually feel anything. And for those people, it doesn't matter how much they drink. So usually the more you drink, the worse your hangover is. But for people who don't experience hangovers, doesn't matter. But what about the unlucky people? So the people who are more likely to have a hangover. What makes them more likely to have a hangover? And is there a way to actually prevent it? So before I get into the unlucky ones, you have to understand a couple of terms. So we talk about hangover vulnerability and hangover frequency. So hangover vulnerability is how likely are you to actually get a hangover? So when you drink, are you just going to know that when you wake up the next morning, you're going to feel terrible? And if you're more vulnerable to hangovers, you're typically more sensitive to the effects of alcohol in the first place. So we see that there's this kind of link between these two. So people who are more likely to have like flushing syndrome, so they turn bright red when they drink, they just in general might feel a little bit itchy, they are more vulnerable to hangovers too. And that makes sense. If you're more sensitive to alcohol, you are probably more sensitive to the negative impacts too. But hangover vulnerability is actually linked to lower drinking. So if you feel terrible after you drink, you are less likely to continue drinking. That makes sense. Whereas on the other hand, hangover frequency is linked to kind of higher rates of drinking, so more likely to develop an addiction. And so hangover frequency is basically saying you are more likely to have more hangovers in a year, which means that you probably are just drinking more. You need to drink more to have a hangover. So these two things are kind of opposite of one another. If you're more vulnerable to hangovers, they kind of make you feel more terrible, and so you're less likely to drink to avoid them. And if you have more hangovers, it's probably because you just drink more, which means you're actually typically less sensitive to alcohol, according to the science. So what makes someone more sensitive to hangovers? We see that there are a lot of genetic factors, some of which are linked to things like you are just less sensitive to alcohol in general. So there was a twin study done in Australia. Over 4,000 twin pairs were studied over periods of time, and they actually directly asked them hangover questions. Now, side note, twin studies are some of the best studies that we have in psychology. I actually, when I did my postdoc at the University of Minnesota, I was in the office of somebody who had done the original Minnesota twin studies, and I felt like, oh my God, I'm amazing. I've officially made it. That's a sad fact about my life. But anyways, these twin studies are so famous because they are so good. They tell us a lot of information about the genetic and environmental aspects of different things. So we see that genetic factors explained about 40 to 45% of how likely someone was to get a hangover. And this seemed to be linked to just how frequently they drink in the first place. So the genetics that are driving how likely they are to drink are kind of similar to the genetics that are driving how likely they are to have a hangover. The study also found that about 15% of people were hangover resistant, which didn't mean that they did not experience hangovers at all, just that they were less likely to. And there were some genetic factors that are involved in that too. But what they are as of right now, we're not entirely sure. We need to study this group of people more to understand how they might be more affected by alcohol or less affected by alcohol, and therefore maybe changes their likelihood of addiction. There are genetic factors linked to how likely you are to get a hangover, but what about things like other factors, like age? So there was one study that said that actually the older you got, the less severe your hangovers were. And this is kind of contrary to what I've heard and what kind of the common idea is going around, which is that you have worse hangovers the older you get. Now, there could be some reasons for this. This study kind of goes into some of them. We actually see that our pain sensitivity does increase as we age. And so maybe we get less severe hangovers because we just feel less pain. It also could be that if you're getting bad hangovers, you're just like, I'm too old for this. I'm not going to drink anymore because I get terrible hangovers and it makes me feel like crap. So I am old enough at this point. I don't need to drink anymore. I'm done. And so those people would then be excluded. So then people who get less severe hangovers as they age would be the ones who are more likely to continue drinking. But we don't know. It just kind of goes contrary to what I've heard. Let me know if you've heard similar things. Now, there's a bit of a debate about whether personality types are linked to the likelihood of getting a hangover. So we know that things like extroversion are linked to more drinking in general. So maybe they'd be more likely to get hangovers too. But in the research on this that we've done, it actually doesn't seem to show that. We do see that higher resilience is linked to lower sensitivity to hangovers, but resilience is like this very complex term that deals with things like sensitivity to stress, all of which can change your likelihood of hangovers too. Like, we do see that some of these psychological conditions, like depression and anxiety, are linked to more hangovers and more severe hangovers. So, congratulations. Not only do you have a disorder that makes functioning in life kind of like putting it on hard mode, but also you're more likely to experience the negative things like getting a hangover after you're drinking, which a lot of people do to cope. Side note, using alcohol to treat your depressive symptoms is a terrible idea. It does not help, it makes things worse. Just putting that out there. Now, we do see that hangover severity is linked to things that you are actually doing during the hangover, too. So, if you're experiencing more stress during a hangover, you are more likely to have more severe symptoms. So, just feel less stress. I genuinely hate when the doctor tells me to do that. So, that was said sarcastically. But do know that the more stress you have during a hangover, the more likely you are to have it be a severe hangover. We also see that pain catastrophizing, so people who are doing things like exaggerating their symptoms or like ruminating on it, like if you like stare at that injury that you got and you're like, oh, this hurts, this is bad, that makes it more likely that that injury is going to hurt. And that makes it more likely that your hangover is going to be severe. So try not to catastrophize about your pain. But again, it's kind of being like, oh, hey, don't feel stress. Now, for those people who experience severe hangovers, is there anything that you can do to kind of prevent that? The short answer here is no. And the long answer is no in a variety of different ways. So no, drinking water the night before does not actually help. No, taking a variety of like hangover cure drugs or hangover prevention drugs, none of them seem to actually work. Now, I will say, to do my due diligence in science, there was one article in the 1970s that said that there was an effect of this semi-synthetic vitamin B6 analog. And this was one of the sketchiest studies that I've seen. So this is done in the early 70s, and they basically just had people come to a party and then either gave them this drug or didn't give them this drug. And they found that they had fewer hangovers if they had received this weird drug that a scientist gave to them before a party. But that's all that I've seen out there on that. Just that one sketchy 70s party. So I might not trust those results. So unfortunately, for those of you who are more prone to hangovers, there's really nothing you can do to prevent it. Just drink less, which is like telling people to just prevent pregnancy by having sex less. We know that it doesn't work that way. Sorry.